Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is Saturday, day 284, December the 16th, 2017. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you and welcome to my new subscribers. It's great to have you all here. This is the weekend edition, which is an evening edition on Saturday and Sunday, so hopefully this video is up before 9 o'clock p.m. and not getting up so late as it was the last couple of weeks. So anyway, we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope for a successful upload. Lots to cover today. So we have learned in the past 24 hours that the phones that were used by Peter Benstrokinus and Lisa Page were phones issued to them by the FBI. That was their FBI work phones. And of course we understand the type of conversations they were having. A lot of conversations about the relationship, obviously, and conversations of the political nature. Now, we have only received about 375 of the 10,000 texts that went back and forth between them on their government-issued phones. We also have a particular text where Lisa Page, speaking in a text to Peter Benstrokinus, says something in regards to the fact that Benstrokinus had suggested that they use their FBI government-issued, work-issued phones because they could not be traced, which shows some intent that they meant to keep their conversations in a secret nature. They didn't want these conversations to be heard. Excuse me. We also need to credit John Solomon, who's of course a staff writer for Circa and is one of the main writers over at thehill.com, for in the last 25 hours his research has unearthed some very good information which gives us a bit of insight into where this entire Russia-Trump narrative may have originated from, because it appears that the main players that we can see at this point regarding the dossier and the Trump-Russia narrative appears to have originated with these characters: Peter Benstrokinus, Bruce and Nellie Orr, Andrew McCabe, and Christopher Steele, and Fusion GPS co-founder Glenn Simpson. So we're learning that even prior to the 2015, beginning the 2016 elections, which actually began in September of 2015, maybe earlier, depending on the candidates, we're learning that these individuals all had relationships dealing with Russia long before any of the things came up with the 2016 election. All these players had been involved in groups, working groups, and things like that associated with both private and government sources, entities, which were part of various investigations about Russia, primarily about Russian corruption. Not just dealing with corruption within the government, within the country of Russia, but of course these Russian mob types, Russian mafia types, they're involved in their things that they do all over the world, not just inside Russia. So it appears that that Simpson, McCabe, or Peter Benstrokinus and Christopher Steele all involved in these types of working groups that were studying, looking into, investigating, reporting on Russia corruption long before the 2016 elections. So that would explain how this group of individuals were already working together on a non-related issue, that being Russian, organized crime and stuff like that. And that formed the basis of what became Trump, Russia, and the dossier. We're also learning that Glenn Simpson was a senior fellow at the International Assessment Strategy Center, which is located in Richmond, Virginia, a hop, skip, and away from Langley, CIA headquarters. Now, as you know, in the past couple videos, I have suggested that it's looking a lot to me like Fusion GPS may be an actual CIA front company, and that Glenn Simpson himself and his partner are likely CIA assets. If you look at what GPS fusion does and where they do it around the world, they're involved around the world. We, of course, know that Fusion GPS was representing the Russian government on the Magnitsky Act. We know that they've been involved on both sides of Russian politics and things and such for years. We know that they were very active in Ukraine. We know that they were active in Moldova. We know that they're currently active right now in the situation going on in Venezuela. So we have all this evidence that suggests that this group of players have been involved in issues regarding Russia, organized crime, and things like that. We can see that they serve on groups, or in groups, on foundations, in foundations, along with other organizations that have close connections to the intelligence community. And we can see that Fusion GPS obviously has very close ties to the intelligence community. We have Nellie Orr, that we learn now was CIA, and Simpson brought her in to specifically focus on Trump-Russia investigation during the 2016 campaign. We know that he has close association with the CIA. We know he has close association with one of his main sources, Christopher Steele, who's former top spy in Russia. So we can see the connections between Fusion GPS and the intelligence community. And you don't have to go very far beyond that to conclude that based on the areas of the world where Fusion GPS operates, the types of things that they do, the players that they involve themselves with, it looks awfully a lot like Fusion GPS is likely a CIA front organization that does propaganda for the CIA around the world. And that would explain the close connections. That would explain why this Trump-Russia and dossier and all this stuff got mixed up in these investigations. And of course, we learned about a week ago that it was John Brennan, head of the CIA, who was early on, back as early as the beginning of June, feeding information to the FBI on the Trump-Russia stuff. We also know that sometime in July, about the end of July, John Brennan briefed certain, it appears, Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, including the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid. So we can begin to see, as we dig further into this, the origins of what became Trump-Russia and the dossier. It originated with all these players who have deep ties to the intelligence community. Now, as you know, McCabe was supposed to testify in front of the House Intelligence Committee, and he canceled. Now, these committees, there's 4 committees, of course, the House and Senate Intel Committees, the House Oversight Committee, and the Senate Judiciary Committee, who are all looking into these. Now, the hearings in the Intelligence Committees, House and Senate, will likely be done behind closed doors, closed sessions. That's what that hearing on Tuesday was supposed to be. With McCabe was supposed to be a closed session, and he'll probably have a closed session in the Senate Intel Community or in committee. But these other 2 committees, those should be open sessions, and we should get to see those. But these are basically the 4 groups working, the 4 committees working on this Trump-Russia, the dossier, and all this other stuff. They're really the ones involved. Now, because this is all kind of going on, it's kind of, maybe a lot of us are not sure exactly what we should expect to come from this, or exactly what all this is being, what this is all about, what it's being done for, and all that. So keep in mind the way this works is these committees do these investigations. Then once they've completed their investigations, they write a final report. And once they've written their final report, they can then recommend to the Justice Department that there's evidence to suggest there have been crimes committed. There's probable cause that crimes were committed. And then what they could do is recommend that a grand jury be seated. And this is exactly what I expect will happen. I expect these investigations will continue on this path probably well into the spring, and that sometime in the spring, late spring, early summer, we're going to see a conclusion to all these hearings, at which point I think there'll be the final drafts will come out from these committees. They'll probably do a joint draft. And we'll probably see one from Republicans, one from Democrats, because they're so divided on what this all means. So ultimately, I think what we're going to see at the end of this is that on the Republican side, they're going to come up with their conclusion that there's probable cause that crimes were committed, and many other things within this entire dossier, Trump-Russia investigation, and all the rest. And they'll probably, in my opinion, they'll likely move to request that the Justice Department call for seating a grand jury to begin interviewing witnesses in a grand jury trial, and begin to put together the case that will likely bring down a great many people within the FBI, the DOJ, probably the Clinton campaign, and others who are on the periphery will probably fall into this web as well. Now, if I were on that committee questioning Andrew McCabe, and I think that I have some questions I would like to ask. These are not all the questions I have, but these are some of them. Now, before I even get into this, I'll tell you that I already know how McCabe and how Peter Ben Strokenus are going to react to all these questions that they're going to be asked. Not just the hypotheticals I'm going to put out, but the ones that will actually be asked, whether they be closed or open session. Right now, you can bet that Peter Ben Strokenus, Gary or Bruce and Nellie Orr, as well as McCabe, are being finally coached on exactly how to handle themselves in these hearings. And they're going to do the exact same thing that we saw from Christopher No Shit Sherlock Ray and Rod Rodenstein. They are going to first say, well, we're relying on the Inspector General, we're waiting for his report, so we're not going to comment on that question. Or they're going to say, well, we're not going to talk about the dossier or anything of a intelligence-related matter, because that's what we're going to do with the intel committees, and we'll do that in closed session. They're going to say that they don't know. They're going to use every type of measure they can not to actually answer the questions and evade anything like that. Just exactly what we saw from Christopher No Shit Sherlock Ray and Rod Rodenstein, we are going to see from Ben Strokenus, from the Orrs, and also from McCabe. That's exactly the same thing we got. We're going to get more of it, which is why they have to continue with these investigations and continue digging, and why this will take some time to play itself out. If all these characters would simply show up and tell the truth and answer questions, we could wrap this thing up in a few weeks. But they're not going to do that, obviously. They have to protect themselves and others. So, this is going to be, the stonewalling will continue. Don't expect much. So I would ask the following questions, but I would not expect an answer. So, if McCabe was sitting in front of me, here are some questions I would have. And Strokenus and Lisa Page referred to a meeting in Andy's office where the idea of an insurance policy was discussed. Mr. McCabe, is the Andy that they're referring to you? Who else was in that meeting? What was the insurance policy that Ben Strokenus and Page were referring to? Was it the dossier? Next question. Mr. McCabe, do you know that Bruce Orr met with Christopher Steele? Next question. Did you know that Bruce Orr's wife was Nellie was working for Fusion GPS? Next question, Mr. McCabe. When did you first learn about the dossier or the memos from the dossier, and how did you learn about them? Next question, Mr. McCabe. Do you know if the dossier was used to secure FISA warrants to conduct surveillance on American citizens and or members of the Trump team? Next question, Mr. McCabe. Do you know that Ben Strokenus and Lisa Page were romantically involved. Did you know about their affair? Next question, Mr. McCabe. Did you know of the hatred for Trump by Ben Strokinus and Lisa Page? Next question. Did you have any discussions or contact with Christopher Steele or Fusion GPS from September 2015 to the present, Mr. McCabe? Next question. Have you had any communications with Senator Magoo since 2015 that had anything to do with the 2016 election, Russian interference in the election, Trump's possible ties to Russians, Christopher Steele, Fusion GPS, or the dossier? Next question, and did you know who gave the dossier to BuzzFeed? Next question, do you know of any payments that were made to Christopher Steele by the FBI? How much and when did those payments occur? Next question, Mr. McCabe. Do you know if the FBI provided information to Fusion GPS or Christopher Steele directly or indirectly, such as Bruce or Nellie Orr, Senator Magoo, or David Kramer? Next question. Do you know, Mr. McCabe, about David Kramer's visit to the UK to meet with Christopher Steele? If you do know or did know about that meeting, how did you learn of it and when did you learn of it? Next question, Mr. McCabe. Christopher Steele's attorneys in court filings say Steele, their client, never met directly with the alleged Russian sources. He cited intermediaries. Do you know, Mr. McCabe, who were the intermediaries that Mr. Steele's attorneys are referring to? Next question. Did CIA Director John Brennan or any of his deputies ever provide you, Mr. McCabe, with information, intelligence documents relating to the memos by Christopher Steele's or the dossier? Next question. Did you discuss with the dishonorable James Comey, your former boss, the dossier? When? What did you discuss with him? Did you discuss the sources of the dossier with former director, the dishonorable James Comey? Did you discuss any plans to pay Christopher Steele for his research? Next question. Mr. McCabe, when did you learn that the Right Reverend Clinton and the Undemocratic National Committee were the sponsors of the dossier, that they were paying for it? When did you learn that, and how did you learn that? Mr. McCabe, did you, during the campaign or any time since September 2015 until the present, have contact with any member or any member of your staff have contact with the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign in regards to the dossier or the Trump-Russia narrative? Those are just some of the questions that I would ask if I were sitting there in front of Andy. And I expect that some of those questions certainly will be asked of Mr. McCabe by the various committees who are conducting this investigation. But as I suspect, a lot of these questions will simply not be answered. The same thing we saw with Christopher No Shit Sherlock Gray and Rod Rodenstein will be the exact type of thing that we'll see with all of these other, all these other witnesses. Let's keep in mind that Andy McCabe is currently under 3 other investigations. The IG, the Inspector General, is investigating McCabe's failure to recuse himself from the investigation of the Clinton emails due to his political relationship with the Clinton Bagman Terry McAuliffe and his wife's Senate run. He's also being investigated for violations of the Hatch Act, where he was engaged in political activities on FBI time. He's also being investigated in the sex discrimination case brought by the female FBI employee, which ultimately led to Michael Flynn being harassed. So those are the three things that he's already under investigation for. Now, just some other breaking news in the past 24 hours, some things we're learning. Former Clinton Secretary of State, Madeleine Halfbright, authored a op-ed on CNN where she suggests that the Congress should strip Trump of his power as commander-in-chief. This is the same woman who, when she was asked by Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes if she thought it was worth it to starve to death 500,000, that's 500,000, Iraqi children, whether or not it was worth it, and she said yes. Madeleine Halfbright, Clinton's former Secretary of State, thought it was perfectly okay that they starved to death 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions, her sanctions. She thought that was A-okay. Yet, she now comes out as some sort of a moralist to tell us why the Congress should remove the president's ability to conduct foreign policy or anything else. Strip him of his power as president. Wonderful. We learned that Lisa Bloom paid off and attempted to pay off Trump accusers. She, of course, is the daughter of Gloria Allred. They both do the same thing. They both engage in the same thing. They're highly unethical people. They are not to be trusted. And I think that this should just about take care of any more accusations. Because apparently she paid off one of these women's mortgages, or people donating to her to pay off one of those mortgages in exchange for her saying something about Trump. Then we had another woman who was wanting $2 million to make accusations against Trump. They finally got up to $750,000, and she backed out. But the money was offered, and we know all about it. I think that Lisa Bloom needs to face a little hearing of her own. And Gloria Allred also has some questions to answer for her affiliation with the situation that went on in the Alabama Senate elections with Roy Moore. Former U.S. Attorney Joe DeGenova told Tucker Carlson that the FBI and the DOJ threw the case against the rotten Reverend Clinton, and that we now are in a constitutional crisis. Of course, this is true. Of course this is true. Keep in mind, Joe DeGenova's wife is Victoria Tunsing. She is the one who's the attorney handling the case for the FBI confidential informant, William Campbell. Here's a question for you. Will the 4 committees investigating the dossier subpoena the rotten Reverend Clinton? After all, she paid for it. She owns the dossier. She was the benefactor. Which leads to the next question. Where are the Clintons? They've been awfully quiet in the last 2 weeks. You don't see them out there. You don't hear them making any comments, which is pretty rare for the Clintons. Hillary's Twitter account has gone dark. They ain't saying nothing. They've gone silent. And will these committees subpoena the rotten Reverend Clinton to testify about the dossier, the Russia collusion, her associations with John Brennan, Senator Magoo, David Kramer, Ben and Nellie Orr, Peter Ben Strokinus, Rod Rodenstein, and Andrew McCabe? Questions the rotten Reverend Clinton needs to answer. She's a private citizen now. I can assume if they bring her to Congress, she will only plead the fifth. Won't answer a damn question. Not a one. But they need to do it anyway. Just to force her to show up there, if for nothing more than to plead the fifth. Because everything that we need to know about what's in the rotten Reverend Clinton's heart and mind is in her eyes. In her actions, her behaviors, and whether or not she wants to talk. If she has nothing to hide, There should be no problem. But we all know better than that, don't we? It will be a Kodak moment. It certainly will, to see the rotten Reverend Clinton look at the camera with those lying eyes and plead the fifth. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to explore what might have actually happened had the Department of Justice and the FBI done their job and indicted the rotten Reverend Clinton. And then we'll understand, at the end of that discussion, why and how we got here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Enjoy your evening. I'm off to have some ribs. See ya.